news, and then I got a few topics I want to talk about. So the big news that's been coming out of Valve this past week has to do with how they're changing the revenue share, or their take, for developers on Steam. And this is a very big deal. Probably more so to others, but I'm curious to see what people think about this. So, for those of you who don't know, one of the core standards of Steam for the last, I guess, even more than a decade at this point, has been their take. And that is, for every copy that is sold, Valve has always taken 30%. And that doesn't matter if you are a AAA developer spending millions of dollars, or an independent developer earning thousands, or unfortunately maybe even hundreds or less. And this has always been considered a very sticky point for people. There are developers who despise this amount. No, different game, Mojo. But there have been developers who hate this, saying, why does Valve deserve such a big take? While other people have defended them, especially in the past, with Valve and Steam being the only game in town, or the biggest game in town, saying that they give so much, so the 30% is, it's pennies compared to what they're offering you. But, as we all know, things have certainly shifted in the last 5-6 years, with Valve becoming more and more, or I should be saying, less and less popular among independent developers, with issues like discoverability, their decisions to change their refund policy, Steam Early Access to Steam Direct, to Steam Greenlight to then Steam Direct, and of course some of the things we've been seeing lately with their responses to toxic and very politically or trollish games on the platform. Now, a lot of people have felt that the 30% is no longer really, giving you the same bang for your buck, especially with the rise of Discord, itch.io, and even what we're seeing with Humble, GOG, and so on. So this is supposedly Valve's way of managing these issues. And here's their official announcement. So this officially was enacted in October 1st, even though the announcement was made a few days ago. From now on, Valve will now take 25% of all sales if your game generates $10 million of revenue. And then that amount will drop further down to 20% if your game earns over $50 million. And when you first hear that, the immediate thought is, that's great. They're lowering the amount of money they're earning so the developer earns more. But then you hear the other part about what those buyout rates are. $10 million and $50 million, respectively. And this sounds very bad, I think, to a lot of people. Because I'm very sure, as we're sitting here talking about this, a lot of indie games are not going to be making $50 million in revenue, let alone $10 million. And a lot of people will see this as a move by Valve to essentially placate or pacify larger companies, the ones who are already going to be making millions of dollars. Your Call of Duties, your Assassin's Creeds, ideally something like Resident Evil, and so on and so forth. And for these companies, and hi Mike, I thanks for coming on as well. For these companies who are already going to be making millions of dollars in sales, it helps them. It helps their bottom line. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, Trayvon. That it's not my. Unfortunately, I'm not the one who was saying about this, but a lot of developers have been saying this. But yeah, it definitely seems more or less trying to keep the big guys happy and kind of being like that incentive, that magical number for independent developers to reach in the future. Is stay on Steam, and if you hit 10 million in sales, you'll get that big 5% discount or 5% revenue share. And I don't know. It's one of those things I've been thinking about more and more lately, with companies trying to pacify people who are struggling, or other, by saying, "Oh, you should be happy that you get, a big, 2% off your next sale, or $5 off if you spend $500 here." While major companies still earn, tax credits and breaks, and they basically control these platforms. And I don't know. This sounds, again, like almost like I'm not sure what's that phrase, a backhand compliment, or it's not really a reward for the people who need it. As Mojo was saying a few minutes ago, struggling or first-time independent developers, this is not going to matter to them at all. And it goes back to what we were saying with that idea of the rich getting richer. That if your game is already earning 10 million or 50 million, let me make sure I get that exact number right. Yeah, 50 million, that still sounds crazy to me. If you're an independent developer and you've earned $50 million in sales, 10% off is not going to matter to you, or 10% more profit doesn't mean anything. And again, for people who are trying to get their first game going, or even just try and be successful, you would think like it would be better for them. Now, with companies, and a lot of people have also been saying that this is also a way of defending against Epic, who have been working with trying to build their own digital store. Let me see. I just want to see what was it? Sales tank. Will this bring it up? Let's see. So it was announced in, let me see, come on, load this up. It was announced a few days ago, or actually it was announced in July, that people who use Epic in terms of their engine, that they're now keeping 80% of their sales as opposed to a 70%. And, oh wait a minute. Oh, I'm sorry. It's on their Unreal Engine marketplace. So and they're also going to be applying that to. We'll be applying this split. Okay, so it's going to be anyone who's sold stuff since then that they're earning 80%. And there are a lot of talk about Epic starting their own game store to compete again with Steam, Ubisoft, and so on. Let me see. Are there any announcements regarding that? Epic game. Epic card game. That doesn't help me. And nothing yet, but there have been a lot of rumors from what I've heard. But the point is that more and more stores are understanding that as Valve continues to make it harder for developers to get noticed and to earn money they need to live, that a major way of providing value is just by offering them more revenue shares. Again, stores like itch.io basically allow you to set your own price, and they take very little. Let me see. What exactly do they take? I'm sure some of the indie devs watching this. Does Unity? I don't know about that, Mike. But I'm sure independent developers watching this right now probably know this more than I do. What exactly does itch.io take? Or do they even allow you to set what their share is when it comes to revenue? Because this is a very big issue that a lot of developers, or a lot of small developers, are facing. And this may actually turn into a mini third topic for today. That is Steam really worth it to smaller devs these days? Because again, it's getting harder and harder to find that value when you put a game on Steam and you basically lose your store within like 2 minutes, or you lose the placing within like a few minutes. And like we said, it's becoming harder. I'm trying to find some information as I'm talking here. It's not easy to design, talk, and do searching at the same time here. Let me see. Marketplace. Increase split for Unreal Engine. 88%. That doesn't really help me here. And so on. I mean, there are quality Unreal and there are quality Unity games, but back to the topic. There's been some rumors. I've been reading a few people's thoughts about on Gamasutra, and some people think that this is basically Valve's way of reaching out to companies like Bethesda and, of course, Epic with Fallout and Fortnite, respectively, because you know that Valve is eyeing Fortnite. Every platform is eyeing Fortnite right now, considering the reach and how much money Epic is making. And again, like, we keep joking about Fortnite, but it really has been kind of like this stealth missile that has hit the game industry this past year. And while myself, I'm sure a few of you watching this right now don't really care about Fortnite from a game perspective, from a money-making point of view, it has been huge. As we all remember, this is the game that finally convinced Sony that cross-platform support may not be that bad of a thing. And Epic is not only earning all the money from the microtransactions and the advertising and Ninja and all those other places, but they're also earning all the money by the fact that they don't have to share it with Valve or with Nintendo or anyone else, because people can play on their phones, they can play on their PC. They are in complete control over this. Oh God, it's that old, Trayvon? Wow. I'll be honest, I didn't even think about that as well. I remember seeing it like at an E3 like 2 or 3 years ago. And that was when they were at the zombie defense version of the game that I'm sure every kid who plays Fortnite has never ever played. Or maybe they saw it as kind of like this optional mode compared to the Battle Royale style. But again, that's kind of the big point with Fortnite, that it pretty much has become like the new Blizzard in terms of, or I'm sorry, I have a better one. It's basically the World of Warcraft of this decade, or maybe even a few years ago, since Minecraft was still huge 4 or 5 years ago. Again, famously with Blizzard and World of Warcraft, they created a game that was earning them, again, infinity money each month on a platform that they controlled. And again, like, what we're saying, like, nobody, I think, is going to be crazy enough to predict that Valve and Steam are going under. At this point, saying that Steam is going to be taken down is the same way of people saying that Epic will decide tomorrow that they've earned enough money with Fortnite and they're going to turn off all the servers. It's not happening. Steam is as ingrained into gaming culture as much as Nintendo is with Mario. For those of you who missed it, what they're doing is, for anyone who's earned 10 million in sales, they're going to drop the revenue split from a 30% take to a 25%. And if you earn 50 million in sales, it goes down to a 20% take that Valve will take on any copies sold. But again, I'll move off of Fortnite in a second here, but the point is that these big games do matter in terms of basically controlling their market. For a time, EA kind of thought they had that with Mass Effect. As we all know, Mass Effect 3 could only be played on the PC. Sorry, I saw like a dust in the corner of my eye there. Mass Effect 3 could only be played on the PC if you got Origin. And of course, people thought there was a time where a lot of Ubisoft's games were Uplay only. But this was 4 or 5 years ago, and there's 2 points there. The first thing with Mass Effect was, as we learned, Mass Effect 3 may have been huge, but the franchise itself has kind of disappeared, so it's lost a lot of that sway. And actually, I just want to look something up really quick. Mass Effect Andromeda is not on Steam, right? I don't think it is. No, it stops at 2. Because that was EA again gambling on the fact that the Mass Effect name was big enough that they didn't care about Steam. We could say the same thing about what Bethesda did with Fallout 76 and what a few of their other games as well. Wait, is Elder Scrolls Online on there? Elder Scrolls Online is... Yeah, so Elder Scrolls Online is still available on Steam, but I know their card game isn't. And the problem was that they were trying to bank on these games being big enough to convince people not to go on Steam, and wasn't working. And likewise, when Mass Effect Andromeda kind of dudded out, and what could arguably be happening with Fallout 76, these major companies are losing a lot of their sway. But while that sounds great news for Valve and Steam, again, things have changed so much over the last 6-7 years, or let's go back to 2010. Again, we've spoken about it. I think Trayvon and I think we even had that conversation on our cast a few weeks ago, that 8 years ago, being on Steam was considered a luxury. It was the you made it moment. It's like when an actor... It would be like an actor being asked to be a star in the next Marvel movie. It's that proof that you've made it, and it's only going to get better from there. I could even equate it to writing my first book. Getting that first book out there is a tremendous credit and prestige for anybody. And it only gets better for you going forward. I know that sounds like I'm, patting myself on the back, but it is true for a lot of people that it is a very big deal. And being on Steam, yeah, exactly. Being on Steam, and this is the strangest thing, and this is actually going to go to another topic I'm going to discuss later today, that being on Steam in 2010 was massive. And it meant so much in terms of recognition and allowing your game to, wow, I can't believe I lost the word into my head, to profit. I'll use that instead. But when we look at how much Steam has changed, the Steam name doesn't mean the same things as it does in 2018 as it did in 2010. I mean, we do a weird games segment every week, which fans know about. And those games that we mentioned, the hentai games, the acid flips, the insane titles, that even if they're only worth like 99 cents or $1, they're still being attached to Steam. They're still on what was considered the marquee platform for game design and game development. And when you have that, again, the Steam name doesn't mean much anymore, and it's meaning less and less for independent developers. Like we said before, one of the major points about Steam and what they gave to developers was the prestige of being on that store. You knew when you saw a game on Steam in 2012 that you were getting a quality title. Steam was promoting it. You were getting, front page recognition. There weren't too many games being released, so your game could be up there for a few days, which I know today that sounds like some strange and weird concept, that a storefront would keep a new game on the front page for like 3 days. And this mattered, because if you didn't do marketing, if you just had a great game, just being on the Steam front page could have been all the marketing that you needed. And I would agree with that, Mike, to some extent, but as I get to my point here. But when we look at today, that with what Steam has become, what exactly does it provide to a developer starting out? We've talked about this many times over, that Steam doesn't sell your game anymore. You as developer have to. And this goes back to, I think, Mike's comment there, that today, the games that succeed continue to succeed. We've talked about this with the positive feedback loop. If you have a Darkest Dungeon, or an Undertale, or a Stardew Valley, a game that has a lot going for it, it's only going to get better from there. Your game becomes popular, so big streamers play it. The big streamers who play it will sell more copies. More people will know about it, which means your game's going to continue to sell, which means you're going to continue to get front page support, which means more people are going to see it, so you're going to keep earning that money. And if more people keep earning that money, more people are going to share it, which means it's going to stay up there. And this is what we've talked about with that clout that big games have. A game like Clash of Clans, or Farmville, or Call of Duty even, these games do not leave the front page because everybody knows about them. And this is another big point. This goes back again to this main topic, that a lot of people view this very pessimistically as a way of Valve essentially continuing to court big names to Steam. Why should they care about your game if you're not going to pull in 10 million in sales? But again, though, what is and isn't considered a crappy game can be somewhat subjective. Again, when I say that, I know that there are asset flip games. I know there are crappy ones out there. But conversely, there are great games that just don't have the marketing or the production values to compete with something like Fortnite or Resident Evil, whatever, that are going to be pushed under the rug. But here's a very strange comment. I want to hear everybody's thoughts on this. That some people feel that this is also Valve's way of punishing major companies by saying that if your game gets close to those milestones, they're not going to advertise it as much. And I don't know. I think that is maybe a little too conspiracy theory. That I think Valve is still going to support these games. They're going to support them, I think, even harder because they want those games to be making millions of sales. Because even if because I mean, really, if your game is earning millions in terms of revenue, if you lose 10%, actually, I want to see this here. What is, if you've earned 59, I should probably pull up a calculator now that I think about this. If you sell a game for $10 million and you get 10%, I mean, seriously, how much is Valve really losing at that level? Not to mention the fact that there's no mention of this being retroactive. So they're still earning 30% up to $999,999 of revenue. And again, like, this has always been that very interesting split about consumer versus developers. Because as Mojo says, consumers are thriving today. You can buy games, AAA titles, for $10 to $15. I mean, hell, Spider-Man had a 30% discount. Fallout 76, I think, had a 50% discount. They're being out for 2 weeks. 2 weeks and being dropped down to 50%. That is just, wow, that's a mind blower right there. But again, though, it comes back to this. For developers, it's getting harder and harder for them to survive. Again, the guys who are successful are going to continue to be successful. But what about people who are just trying to break even or start out? And I know the consumer's going to say, well, don't release a crappy game. But if we're going to see more experimental games, we need stores, I think, to shoulder at least some of the risk. And this is one of the big points I think a lot of people have about Valve. At this point, Valve is not going to run out of money. If Valve runs out of money, that's a sign of the apocalypse. So they should be able to do a little bit more to help developers. I got my 2 drinks ready as well. But the point is that if there aren't good games being released, then people aren't going to be buying them. So that hurts things in the future. It's the idea of making things sustainable for the game industry. That if it's not worth it to release a game on Steam, everybody's going to go to another store. And then we're going to be left with more and more lesser quality games on Valve. Yep. And like we said, this all goes back to the perception of what's being released. Like we say, like it's getting harder and harder to find quality titles. And Valve is not making it any easier. The Apple or the Google Play Store is not making it any easier. And they're going to continue to get the big games, get them mentioned. They're going to keep advertising for them. I mean, it's why we still see commercials for stuff like Clash of Clans. I keep seeing stuff for that Civ ripoff as well. Because why should a commercial, why should a storefront advertise a game like, I don't know, like the Binding of Isaac, for instance. Binding of Isaac kind of is that game that it's earned a lot, but we've seen very little advertising for it. Yeah. But I do think that smaller developers do need at least something. And this is why I think a lot of people have been turning to itch.io, by the fact that you can set whatever the revenue split is. Now, obviously, of course, itch.io doesn't have the pull of Steam. And there are people, I'm 100% sure of this, there are people who will only buy games on Steam because that's the big name. Again, as we've said before, Steam is consumer first, probably developer second or third. But the philosophical question, or the marketing question is, were those games going to be successful with or without the help of Steam? The Cuphead example continues to come up here. Did Cuphead need Steam, or did they just need Microsoft supporting them? Exactly. Now, the big thing, what a lot of people have been kind of talking about, is Discord. Discord, again, is another one of those companies that kind of popped up, and they're getting more and more renowned. I mean, we've been trying to wean off of Skype with our podcast and use Discord, and it seems to be working. Because everybody does not, more and more people I talk to just do not like Skype for their stuff. Yeah. And like we said, there are games that do that. The Binding of Isaac has certainly earned that money. Undertale has definitely earned that money. Stardew, Darkest Dungeon. But I think the big question is, are those examples or just exceptions? I think a lot of people will view that as exceptions to the norm. Now, here's the other point about this. I know I keep saying that phrase here, and I know this is something that probably Consumer or Mojo is going to bring up. The games that don't earn that money, do they deserve it? And I know that's very cynical to say, but we have seen so many independent games here on the Game Wisdom channel. There are games that I have not shown you guys, I've gotten keys for, that they just didn't work to do like a full review on, that I may be using for the independent spotlight. And the question is, here's a big one. We just did that play of Brocat, the B game, on Steam or on stream the other night over people watching this over the weekend. That is a game that anybody who looks at that will probably say that does not deserve one sale. And I'm pretty sure only 2 people have played that game, and I'm one of them. If we look at that chart there. But here's the other point. What about a game like Asura? I loved Asura, and the people who have watched us play that game and who know about Asura love it. But that's a game that has had very little marketing, and outside the people who have played it, they probably don't know about it. What about Monolith as well? I was shocked when Monolith showed up at AGDQ this past summer. And again, that's another example of a game that if you didn't know about it or you didn't play it, would you have known about it, I should say, to give that developer sales? Because that game totally deserves some of those profits. And like Mike said, Greenlight was, I think, the first big quality loss, because there are developers out there who try to game that system. I've received emails from developers telling me, if you like my game, just vote for it. And we saw companies try to game that as well. Many independent developers received emails from people saying, if you give me $2,000, I will get you, 2,000 upvotes on Greenlight to get your game on Steam. And this was 4 or 5 years ago, maybe even a little bit less than that. And and there's companies, there's Steam groups and companies these days that are doing stuff like, we do key giveaways if you vote for games, and people who say, if you give us 50 keys, we'll make sure to get your game out there. But then those keys just end up on a gray market site, I can't remember the name of that company. The one that we talked about that was very skeevy. I see their logo, I just can't remember what they're called. Somebody will probably bring that up in chat, though, in the next few seconds. And again, all this, it doesn't hurt the big name people. Again, Call of Duty, Battlefield, Nintendo, Blizzard, you name it, they're not feeling the effects of games like Russian Simulator on Steam. But for everybody else, though, it gets harder for them to make it. And this again goes back to the point, or the original point, about Steam. There are developers like Jeff Vogue, Cliff Harris, Jake Burgett, and so on, who have been around for 10 plus years. They've been making games long before anybody ever heard of Steam. And they know what it's like to try and sell your game on your own. And none of them ever want to go back to that time. No developer who was trying to sell games pre-1000 want to go back to the time of trying to sell their game on their own website, because they know that despite the issues with Steam, that there's still a darker fate. And this, I think, is another plus for the consumer side. And goes back to Mojo's point earlier. People like Mojo, like general consumers, they're not going to go hunting for websites to find a game that they want. Let alone go to a website that looks like it could probably install viruses or, mine a cryptocurrency off of their game. Because again, this also goes to another point. If you want to sell your game on your own site, you're going to have to spend money on getting a professional looking site. You also have to spend money to make sure that you have a reputable and credible, a third-party storefront as well. Like, a BMT Micro, the Humble Widget, stuff like that. And that's more money out of your own pocket. Which, again, on one hand, people will say, well, that's just you shouldering that risk. But on the other hand, if you're already, stretching your budget as thin as possible, it's going to be very hard for you to afford that stuff. And there's no easy answer for this, because no matter how we decide this, somebody's going to get the raw end of the deal. And depending upon on your own thoughts, some of you think that the smaller people who have everything to prove should shoulder that risk, while some of you will probably say that the big name companies, the ones who have already succeeded, who have made millions of dollars of revenue, maybe they should take a little bit less and help the little guy out. And I think for me, I'm on the side of supporting the smaller people. Because again, if you've earned $50 million in revenue on Steam, you are probably not hurting for money anytime soon. And who said that? Like Mike said, there are smaller games, there are smaller developers who've earned that money, who have came out of nowhere. Developers like Battle Brothers, Subnautica came out to surprise everybody. And we could even argue that Fortnite, could have turned out to be a complete waste of time, but they surprise everybody like that. And it does seem like Epic is one of those companies that understands the importance of keeping the market rich and keeping it thriving. And like I said, and I think, let me check our time here. I've been ranting and raving about this for 40 minutes, and this was simply supposed to just be a news piece, too. But if Epic tomorrow announces their own digital game store, or it's sounding more like that's going to happen in the near future, it sounds like they're really going to try and make things open for more people. And I think at this point, the only way we're going to see Valve and Steam change their minds is that somebody's got to hit them in their checkbooks. And we haven't seen anybody, do that in a very long time. There were worries about Origin and Uplay, but again, they didn't turn out. I don't know if Mike is... Are you being sincere or sarcastic with that, Mike? It's kind of hard to tell with how quick the conversation is going. But the only way somebody is going to make things easier is that they're going to need the weight of a company like Epic to say that we support smaller developers over Activision, over Blizzard, Nintendo, Sony, you name it. And maybe they're the ones to do it. There was argument about Tencent trying to be the next Steam killer. This was about 6 months ago. But we're not really seeing anything like that. And here's my final point, because I'm going to end this on a dour and cynical note. That the companies who have the weight... Okay. And I guess we'll feed into that. That the companies who have the weight to make a move against Valve are going to still support the big name, the big money makers. Again, if you're a company trying to earn money on your marketplace and you have to choose between putting Call of Duty or putting Always Sometimes Monsters on your platform, if you could only choose one of those two games, who here thinks that they're going to choose Call of Duty? Because at the end of the day, the companies that are going to stay around need to earn that money. And I know we're getting to the whole capitalism versus communism argument here. But at the end of the day, if you want to survive as a company, you need to bring in money. And this goes for all aspects. This goes for the storefronts who are trying to sell their games. This goes for the developers trying to earn a living. And I see what Mike's point is. That again, if you just say, we're going to let every small developer on, regardless of sales, we then run to this, we then create another Valve, or we create another Steam. And again, it's very hard, because I see Trayvon's point as well on this. That, again, there are plenty of developers who don't know how to market their games. We've seen this, you've seen this, the people on chat have seen this as well. Sometimes they don't know because they just don't have that background in marketing. Sometimes they just refuse marketing as well. And there are games that have succeeded in spite of marketing. But then that other voice in my head says, could they have done even more if they understood how to make a successful YouTube video? Or know how to reach out to influencers and streamers and YouTubers, which I know for the developers watching this right now, they love that term, influencer. They love to have to contact somebody like Markiplier or PewDiePie to get their game known. And again, it's not a problem that gets solved in a day. And then this is going to feed into my next topic that I want to talk about in a few minutes. That, like we said, at the end of the day, somebody is going to have to take a hit. It's just the nature of the beast here. If there's only $5 million to go around, if you want to give somebody a greater piece of that pie, somebody's going to have to take less. And I know optimists will say, well, if we shoulder the risk now, everybody will earn that money in the future. But, like, going back to Mike's point, though, just as there are developers who need that extra money, who need that extra help because they don't know how to do it and they just know how to make a great game, there are developers who will exploit that. And I don't know if that's the realist in me or the cynic in me. That, again, like, we look at stuff like, what was it? The Slaughtering Grounds. That famous game, or that company that only got famous because they were trying to sue Jim Sterling. Like, there are companies, like all those companies who release very crappy games. I know Mike, of course, talked about this with Unity and the asset flip side. There are plenty. You can't ignore the fact that there are crappy games out there. That there are developers whose sole reason to make this game is to try and steal as much money from consumers before the store takes them off, or before someone like Jim or other YouTubers make a video condemning them. And unfortunately, you can't get around that in a free market. Just as there are those crappy developers, there are developers like Trayvon said that they don't know how to market their games. They've never done a marketing campaign. They may never want to do a marketing campaign, but they make great games, and they are being buried under everything else that's being released. Like I said, right now on Steam, there are probably 20 games being released today. Every day, the new releases, that list gets completely shuffled. Unless we talk about the games that are already succeeding. Like right now, Darksiders 3 is still being listed as a popular new release. And it has mixed reviews. And it's still staying up there because the name and the marketing that is going into it. Farming Simulator 19 has TV commercials. I've seen them. And they're calling it like the most realistic or the prolific simulating series is back. That is true. How long did it take me to beat Brocat? I could actually return that. And again, the cynic side of me agrees with you, Mike, that it's not up. Oh, I'm sure they do, Mojo. I'm sure there are plenty of people. There was even that case when someone beat Sonic. What was it? The latest Sonic game. He beat it under 2 hours, and then on stream he returned the game and got his full money back. And that was on a AAA game. So I'm sure they do that with independent ones as well. But again, it's that case, and this is the risk of that merit, of the merit-based system, that the games that do succeed continue to succeed. But then there are plenty of games that don't succeed despite being great titles. And that's the thing. And this actually goes back to my presentation I'm going to talk about on Tuesday. When it comes to succeeding game development, that so many things have to go right to succeed. And many people who only know half the solution, they know how to make a great game, but they don't know how to do marketing, they're not going to succeed. Don't say that, Trayvon. I just wrote a book. One of you post print is dead in the chat just to make me feel better as well. But there's just, like I said, there's no, I think, perfect situation for this. And my eye is also bothering me as well. I mean, my allergies are starting to come back. But nobody is, no matter how we change this, somebody is going to get screwed in the end. And depending upon where you side in the consumer, developer, or even publisher debate, is going to determine who you decide, like who you want. Yeah. Yeah. I would like to say like I'm part of that as well, Mike, in terms of showing off independent games. And like we've said, there are many games that have succeeded only by virtue of somebody like PewDiePie, or again, the late Total Biscuit, talking about them. And you can argue, there are many people who argue till the cows come home about Total Biscuit and what he did and didn't do and all that, but at the end of the day, Total Biscuit did a lot for independent developers. And again, somebody's going to have to shoulder that. And I'm going to say final point, I'm going to mean it this time, because we're going to move on here before I just start ranting about this for another 30 minutes. And this is my point, and this is my final question for everybody watching this, whether it's live or recorded. Who do you think should shoulder that weight? Should it be a smaller developer? Somebody who doesn't have the name to sell their game and doesn't have, a lot of money, doesn't have a lot to make their title? Should it be the successful developer, the one who has earned 10, 20, 50, $100 million in sales, who has probably secured their next game or even their next 2 or 3 games thanks to their success? Or do you think it should be the publisher? Should it be the companies who have, millions, if not billions of dollars to throw at marketing, who can, stand to lose a few $1,000s to help somebody else? Or do you think the consumer should shoulder that risk? The people who are buying these games on Steam, who see all this stuff on sales and who get, free chat and updates and all that, should they shoulder some of the risk? And I think most people will probably say no to that, but they're still a part of this equation. And again, it's going to be, at the end of the day, somebody's got to do it. Because if they don't, it's ultimately going to hurt everybody. But to answer that question, I am certainly not going to be able to solve this in a, where are we at? 52-minute long video, not counting the part that we started on. So, for people watching this recorded, we're ending this video on this depressing note. For the people watching this live, we'll be moving on to something maybe a little less sad in the next minute or so.